If you could introduce yourself and say how old you are.
My name is Bob Bowen. I was born on the island October 20th, 1932, and my mama's name was Anna, and my daddy's name was Harvey. Harvey Lee, Hog Island, Virginia. Or Broadwater was a community on Hog Island, Virginia. 1932. Mhm. And
How old are you, Bob?
I'll be 68 my next birthday, which will be in October, shortly.
Have a lot of good, lasting remembrances of Hog Island?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I can remember. Some people say I can remember when I was born, but I can't quite remember that back that far. But I remember a lot of things that took place. If you got about a couple of days, I can tell you about them. But we're going to get that in a short while. I remember the Coast Guard stations were very active on both ends. I remember when they built the station on the north end. The people would go up there clamming, and I remember we went up rode up with John Higby's car, and the people were out clamming. I wasn't too much interested in clamming about that time, but I went to see the station, and they were building it. It was brand new, and that's been quite a few years back. And of course, the station on the south end was very much part of the community. It was like family, and I remember all of that and a lot of things that took place. I remember the lighthouse, the old revolving bullseye that would come around, and that was very interesting to see that, especially at a little fog, that thing would glare out. I remember a lot of stuff like that. I remember a lot of the homes. Yes, but no question.
Bob, you were just talking about the revolving bullseye on the
Mm-hmm.
lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about that. I've never heard that before.
Well, I don't know too much about it. It wasn't that old, but it was a lens, a real powerful lens that revolved around that thing, or circles of so many seconds, I guess, or minutes. Uh, Later years, they took that out, put a light on top of it. I think this wound up in the Miners Museum, but then I think he went to Smithsonian Institute. And so I don't know exactly where it is, but it was a real big, heavy mechanism. I remember years later climbing up in that lighthouse, and it's after it was gone, and seeing the place where it was, and it floated on mercury, and the machinery and everything that was involved in it. And I can imagine that in its heyday it was something to look at. But I never did see it when I saw it revolve, but I never did go up in the tower when it was at there. So
There were two lighthouses on Hog Island. Which lighthouse are you referring to?
the one that was commissioned, I think, in 1894, which was a steel lighthouse, same kind of lighthouse that's on Smith's Island right now. Yeah.
How did they make the light?
How did they do what? I guess it was by candle power, by uh, I don't know exactly, lantern. I never thought of it that way, but I don't know if they had any electricity. They didn't generate electricity there. They did it at Coast Guard station, but not there that I remember. So it had to be some kind of kerosene or something like that, burner. It did that.
Growing up on the island as a child, what was your fondest memory?
Oh, I got a bunch of them. How I can remember that every time I would go out of the house and start across the yard somewhere out of the yard, I was always reminded to watch out for the biting sheep. So the sheep would, they'd say, "Oh, that biting sheep's going to get you." I said, "Not me. I can run fast." And when I'd go from my grandmother's house over to my house, it was a fence, I wasn't very far, but I'd fly hard as I could go, keeping that biting sheep getting me. And I remember being out on the beach with my sister and another. I think it was one of the Dowdy's daughters, Elmer Dowdy's daughters. Tide was up real high, and we were up in the kind of in the high part of the beach. Tide was up real high, and the sea was running. It would run in, and while we would walk, just as soon as you'd walk it, the sea would run over, and it wouldn't be any footprints out. And that kind of scared me. I thought I was going to get swept out to sea. So I can remember that real well. I can remember, well, I ought not to mention this, but I can remember my granddad had a duck trap on there, but that was years ago. And he wouldn't carry me to his duck trap. I wanted to go with him. And it seems to me that I let the cat out of the bag. I don't know if they took me serious or not, but my granddaddy's duck trap, you know. And if I remember the Coast Guard, I remember when some people died and the Coast Guard come and getting the bodies and kind of bringing them over to the mainland. I remember we had, my Uncle Ralph had ponies, uh, had a bunch of them. He sold those to a farmer at Chincoteague. They took them from Hog Island, put them on Assateague. Also, at the time, they had cattle. He sold them some cattle. He sold them a bull. And in the process of getting this bull in the pen, the bull was real wild. He broke his ankle off right here. And they had to get him on the barge to carry him to Chincoteague. And the way they did that, they put ropes on each side of him, men over here, and then some guy would get right in front of him, and that bull would chase it. And that's how they got that bull down to that landing to get on that. But I remember his leg, it was, pitiful where his leg was broke like this. I don't know, like I say, tomorrow I can remember a whole lot more stuff than I can today. But yes, kind of. And, huh? They just call up all the ducks. They just catch ducks even. And you can bait them with corn. And those ducks go after corn like something crazy. And you get duck chews, and then you could just catch a whole bunch of them. You could load up, and it got to the point where it was depleting everything, so they outlawed it.
Did you ever go shorebird hunting on the island, on the beaches?
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid. In fact, that's what mostly that's what the people in the wintertime, it was they lived by using a shotgun for hunting. And of course, in summertime, it was fishing line, fishing, rod and reels, and that kind of stuff. But mainly it was hand line then, and clams and oysters and that kind of stuff. Everybody depended on mostly that. And of course, they had livestock on there. They would kill beef, and sometimes it would be brought from the mainland. But they were, pretty much dependent on what they would get or do right there. We never had a garden, but a lot of the people did have gardens on there and raised different things. But we never had a garden. One thing that we never used, I can never remember of eating steamed crabs while we lived on Hog Island. Very, very few of the people that I can remember ate steamed crabs, soft crabs in the summertime and spring, but never steamed crabs. I don't know why. That I don't know why. Maybe they thought maybe they'd eat a dead man or something. But anyway, my daddy, I remember he had a store, and it was, I can remember, uh, 3 stores. My Uncle Wendell had a store. That was May's husband. Uh, then they had this store, the post office, which was run by Al Simpson and his wife at that time. And I can remember that. So it was 3 stores on there. And how many people? Uh, I don't know how many people lived on that, to tell you the truth. Maybe 100, 125, something like that. I don't know. Maybe at the most. I guess they had a lot of people coming and going, but the actual people that lived on there, I don't remember.
As a child, as most young boys do in their childhood, do you remember doing any mischievous task now that you look back on and you think to yourself, boy,
Never.
that was funny.
Well, yeah, but some things I'm not going to talk about that. But Wimpy Hamlin and myself, we got teamed up there for a while, and we did some things that we got some spankings for. But but no, I don't remember. But now later years after we moved over here, that to the Willis's Wharf, might have done something different things, but not on the island.
Your father, Harvey,
Yes.
ran a seafood business on the island.
Well, when I first can remember, we'd go out clamming, that kind of stuff. I don't remember Dad having a seafood business on the island. Now, when we were living on the island, Dad was in the Federal Game Reserve, and he was also a federal warden after we moved over here, and for a few years, not too long. And it seems to me that maybe he came back out of that and went to planting oysters. Oh, just about in the early 40s. Went to planting oysters. Oysters used to be out on your oyster rocks. You go out and cull a few bushel and that kind of stuff. Everybody had a piece of oyster ground. Well, it got to the point where they couldn't make any money on the oysters. They couldn't do anything with them, and so most of the people just give Daddy the oyster ground. That's how he accumulated all of it. And so he began to plant oysters out on everywhere. And about that time, the war began, and the market picked up, and that's how we got into the oyster business. And Uncle Wendell and John L. Marshall and all of the uncles who worked in it at different times. In the wintertime, in the summertime, they do different things. They would shark fish, clam and crab, and different things like that. But mainly in the wintertime, it was all oysters, either seed, catching seed, or catching oysters to bring into the oyster house and culling, that kind of stuff.
Years ago, everyone, or a lot of people, had oyster watch houses.
Mm-hmm.
Different areas of Hog Island Bay were named different things, some of the old names.
Mm-hmm.
Can you remember any of the old names that were given to some of the marsh areas of the oyster rocks?
Well, it was one oyster house that I remember was over called Rouse Hole. That was up from the south inlet from the north end of Cobb Island, south end of Hog Island, which belonged to Mr. Tom Ed Bedgeworth. The remains of that were there for quite a few years. The poles it set on. That's the one that I really remember. But there were more. There were some at Argyle Shoal. There were some, I guess, in a lot of different places on White Point, I believe, Egan Marsh, a lot of Gull Marsh, a lot of High Shoal Lump. Near about everywhere, High Shoal Green, everywhere that you had oyster rocks, they had a house there at different times. And a lot of those old foundations are still there right today. On some of the oyster rocks, you can go there and see the little old nubby pole sticking up about so high, and the remains are still there. And some of those houses are here in Willis's Wharf that were used for that. I think it's one in Charles Simpson's yard that was down at Argyle Shoal, in John's Green area. It's called Argyle Shoal Green.
Bob, up around the island itself, all the little creeks and guts that were up in the island had names.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recall some of the names?
Well, Old Place Creek, Swan Creek, Schoolhouse Gut, Upper Creek, and I forget the main creek that came in. I don't know what we call that. They call that the Lower Creek. That was where the mail boat would come in, and the mail dock was there for the mail boat to land. And also the Coast Guard, their creek was off of that up to the boathouse, which later years, where that creek drained out, it was a small ditch cut through. The saying goes that the man had crab floats out in his creek, and the tide run so hard that it would disturb his crab floats, and so he cut a trench through the marsh. And of course, that got bigger and bigger. And as that got bigger, it took more of the flow of tide. And eventually, the main creek from where the Coast Guard slip was on out down to the creek where the lower creek where the government dock was and some houses and stuff, that began to fill up until now it's filled up to a point where it's just like high marsh. It's grown all over. So it really, yeah.
Getting back to the island, okay, sure. You're doing swell.
Oh.
They're doing swell. The old names is what needs to be kept. Bob, up on the island itself, in the community of Broadwater, there were many families.
Mm-hmm.
Can you remember the names of some of the families and some of the men of the island?
Yes. See, we had the Phillips family. They lived down the island. We had the two families of Bells, I think, that lived on there. We had Dowdies, Melvins. Let's see, and of course the Bowen family, which I'm a part of. And I know it's some more, but right offhand, I might not be able to think of them. But we had a lot of personnel in the Coast Guard. We had some Kellums that lived on there from Prig while they were in the Coast Guard. We had Matthews, which Greer Matthews was in charge of the station. Later years, we had Sud Bell and his brother Lynn that moved there, but they moved there after all the people had moved off the community from there. Uh, I don't know. I know there's some that I've missed of the families that lived there. We had Higby's, yeah, John Higby and his family. And like I say, tomorrow I can think of a whole lot more than I can today. But that was, I think the biggest part of the people that lived on there.
Growing up as a young boy, tell me what a typical day would be like from the time you got up, what time you got up, to the time that you went to bed that night.
Well, mainly it was play. And it would be out in the yard. Our yard was fenced in. We had a wire fence all around, and it would be out in the yard playing around. We had a little fish pond. I remember that real well. We'd watching the fish. Then at times I would go with Dad. Would take me clamming. We'd go out in the old scow, and we'd go over to north end of Cobb Island, or Pig Island we call it, and we'd go up to High Shoal and Argle Shoal and those places and clam. I didn't do much clamming, but I was there. And I remember this. I remember riding on the island in my uncle's Model T, Harry Bowen's Ford. He had an old truck. And I remember my cousins, especially I remember my cousins that would come from New Jersey to visit us, the Kalana family. And they would come down about twice a year. I remember all of that. And of course, I'm over my grandmother's yard, my grandmother and granddaddy Harry, and then my great grandparents, Dave Dowdy. Their homes were all in one big fenced-in yard, and I can remember being over there playing in that a lot. And of course, you could see the boats going, back and forth. You could see out in the bay, and then I remember the Coast Guard pickup coming by. And the one thing that I really remember was Granville Phillips. When I was a kid, Granville Phillips bought a brand new bicycle. We lived up on the north end of the community. He came up one day with that bicycle. That was the prettiest thing I ever saw in my life, was that bicycle. And I also remember that day because after he left, I was running down the two-lane road and I fell, cut my knee on a piece of shell. I got the scar right today for that. So I remember Granville's bicycle and cutting my knee that day. And of course, it was a lot more things that took place, but I can't recall them at the time.
3 meals a day?
Yeah, 3 meals a day. I remember one time in the winter that I came out in the kitchen and there was this monster bird laying in a chair that Daddy had shot. This was where the shotgun cut me in, in the wintertime, ducks. And this was made into a pot pie. It was a cranky. I don't know if y'all eat a cranky pot pie or not, but it tastes good.
A cranky, what's another name for a cranky?
Well, this was a big cranky. Then they had one they called a donkey do, and they called one a blue heron and a wop, that kind of stuff. Had different names for them. And but mainly in the wintertime, it was ducks or geese. And of course, like you asked me before, in the spring, not in the springtime, during the spring migration, the shorebirds were never hunted. But when they came back in the fall, after they'd been up and raised their young, when they came back in the fall, then that's when they were hunted. Yeah, and not never in the springtime.
What kind of shorebirds did they hunt?
Well, we had grayback, robin, snipe, yellow legs, and those what you call those beach birds that fly in those big bunches, that can turn and you don't see them, then you do, and all this kind of stuff. Sandpiper, I guess, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, these were a delicacy. Real good. Curlew, yeah, curlew. Not too many curlew. Curlew wasn't very plentiful when I can remember, but they are like they are now. Yeah.
Getting back to the typical day and the life of a child on the island growing up, you said you played a lot. Quite sure you had your lunch, and after lunch, what would you do?
Well, now I go to sleep, but I didn't then. uh, I don't know, just about the same thing. And I can remember one of my big projects when I was growing up was a hatch cover that was out in the corner of the yard. It came off the beach, came off an old barge, wooden thing about this wide, maybe about 24 inches wide, maybe wider, probably about 6 foot long. And I had witnessed some of the house moving that they did on there at the time. And a little later, after we moved off, more of the houses were moved, which was part of that. And I'd witnessed some of this house moving, how they put the rollers down, to roll the houses along. So one of my big projects I can remember was moving this hatch with drink bottles as rollers. And of course, it worked out pretty good, but I didn't move it very far. And that soft sand.
Same thing, she was growling.
It's a
How about putting
sensitive
this up a
bite.
little higher? How about putting this up a little higher? Hmm. Oh, I didn't witness that. I heard about all that style of stuff. That was for my time. Right, people whittling over in the lane. My dad would tell me, click it on, I'll tell you.
Let's do that one.
All right. Yeah.
Bob, many stories have been passed down through generations on Hog Island.
Mm-hmm.
And I know your father was proclaimed as one of the historian of Hog Island, basically. Can you recount any old stories that he passed on to you?
Well, mainly he was telling me about things that had taken place and how the people lived even before when he was a kid. He would say that most of the men would, they didn't have any electricity, they didn't have an electric bill or water bill or any kind of bills, but so they spent most of their time after they got some age on them just laying around or sitting around talking. He said they would go out fishing in the morning. They would catch some fish, bring them in, and they'd be cooked and have them for their lunch or dinner, we call it, middle of the day. And then they would go up to a certain place, a lane that out towards the beach where they all would meet, and they'd just sit there and talk, and they'd have real sharp pocket knives, and they'd start whittling, and they would just whittle everything they could get a hold of, and just do this and talk, and then of course they'd go home for supper, and the next day they'd get up and they'd do the same thing over again, and go out and catch some fish, bring them in and cook them, and then spend the rest of the day just leisuring around, not doing a whole lot of anything, and then that. Of course, he would tell me some other stuff about some sayings that people, some things that they said and so forth. But mainly, my dad would talk about the things that would and my uncles too, especially. They would tell you about nipkins and the ganny nippers and the wonkuses and that kind of stuff, that was going to get you at night. And of course, Nipkins, he was a great character. When you go out on the boat and spend the night, Nipkins would always come and get on the boat. He never would come in the cabin, but he'd be out on the stern or somewhere, and he'd always shake the rudder, and he'd shake that rudder, so you'd hear him out there on deck. But what that really was some of the guys that was laying down under the sides asleep would reach up and grab the wheel lines after you turn the lights off, and they'd pull these lines, that's Nipkins out there. And of course, you were down there on the corner, all huddled up. And of course, the ganny nippers, they run around on the beach after dark, and the wonkuses, they were always there. So it was always something going to get you, no matter where you went. And Daddy said that when he was a kid, that the favorite pastime would be get to the store, all the men get around, and they start telling all these weird ghost stories. And not only at the store, they do this. And when you got home, late in the evening, they would, people would sit around and tell these ghost stories. And he said they tell you all these weird stories and everything. He said then what they would do, they'd cut all the lights off and make you go upstairs to a dark bedroom and go to sleep, go to get to bed. And he said that was kind of nerve wracking, but this kind of stuff was real big back in that day, and that was entertainment. That's all they had. These things like this. And he told me about stuff like that. And then we would go different places. I remember one afternoon we walked up in the woods, and it was a little footbridge. And Daddy he went in I guess when he was in the federal game warden, he went down the Dismal Swamp, snake catching, some different snakes. So he kind of prided himself at handling snakes. I didn't think much of them, still don't. Anyway, one day we're walking up through the woods, and he said, "Look at there." And there was under the bridge was a snake with his tail sticking out about that far. And so he just reaches down and grabs that snake with his tail and picks him up. And when he does, he turns and looks for me. I'm gone. I'm halfway back to the house. But I remember, different things like that.
Bob, when you were growing up on the islands, or when you became a young man on the island, did you ever visit any other islands, or have any stories, or heard any stories about any other islands?
We were on Cobb Island quite a bit, or north end of Cobb Island. We call it Pig Island, but it was actually Cobb Island. We would go over there clamming, as I said before, and I remember Rogues Island, which was between the two. Wasn't anybody on Rogues Island, but it had a colony of birds on Rogues Island at one time, with the white and gray egrets, I guess you call them, or heron. And I remember going over there with Dad to ban some of those birds, but mainly it was on the Hog Island. I don't think I ever went to Pine Moor until later years up that way. Of course, after and yes, okay. Later years after we moved off the island, and Dad, I thought he got permission from the Cobbs that owned Cobb Island, and we had some sheep on there, and some cattle at one time, and also Dad sent to Oklahoma and got, I think it was 6 or 8 jackrabbits, and we carried those things down, and he said, "I'm not going to turn these things out right now. I'm going to put them in the pens and for a while and keep them in the pen." So he made this little pen, and he put these jackrabbits in the pen. We were standing there watching them, and they all run around, and then they stopped real still. And then all of a sudden, they all went in a bunch. Fire was flying everywhere. And then they would run off at corners and stop again, look at each other, and go back again. He said, "Well, if we don't get them out of this pen, they're going to kill themselves." So we just took the pen down, and they went. And from that, I guess it's still jackrabbits on there today. Lord knows how many jackrabbits from those 6 rabbits. I think it was maybe 4 does. I think it was 6 rabbits, 4 does and 2 bucks, something like that. But it's been a minute jackrabbit. People would go on there and get those things. So we tried that several times. We would get some and eat them, or tried to, but they were kind of strong, not like a regular rabbits. But it's still jackrabbits on that day. We also turned out pheasants and quail. The pheasants were on there for a while. I don't know if it's in now, but the quail, they didn't stay very long. They either left or something happened to them. But we planted pine trees on Cobb Island. We planted cedar trees, and I think it's some still there now. Everything would have done real good, but the beach would catch on fire. They were using that partly for a bombing range years ago, and it would catch on fire from that. And probably just a thunderstorm would catch it on fire, but several times it would burn and sweep, and the only trees that would really were left were those in a sandy area where there wasn't much vegetation, or around some water holes that were on there that grew up on there.
Lick your hand.
I should have. I didn't wash my hair last night. Yeah. I took a shower. First one I've had in a couple 3 weeks, but then it wasn't.
Usually just your soap.
That don't work too good. That salt dries on you. Don't feel too good.
Bob, on the island, it was a highly religious community. Tell us about church life on the island.
Well, we had a church, Methodist church. When I can remember, didn't have a permanent pastor. He would come, different ones come at different times. But I remember going to church. Remember going to the services. I remember one Sunday that after church, everybody was going down to the lower part of the island to get ice cream. For some reason or other, Mama didn't want to go get any ice cream. And of course, I threw one of those little old sookie fits, like the Islanders do. And Mama throwed a bigger sookie fit and changed my mind about ice cream. And so we didn't get any ice cream. But another time I remember, we went to church at Christmas time. Christmas, they had a Christmas program. And Natty Bell and myself were set up on the front row. And of course, I was behaving myself, but Natty, he was misbehaving, And Daddy said, did this to me, come back here. I went back and she said, if you don't behave yourself, I'm taking you out of here. Not me, Dad. So I'll go back on the front row, and Natty Bell was sitting down myself, and we weren't doing a thing. Everything was fine. Daddy, come back here. Went back there. He said, I'm carrying you home. And I don't know what he carried me home for. But anyway, what I was waiting for, we were all of us kids were waiting for Santa Claus was coming. And Santa Claus was going to give us those little boxes of candy, with the little felt hand, with the pictures on it. And, so I was waiting for that. And Daddy carried me on up to the house. And I never did get that box of candy from Santa Claus. I can remember that real well about church. And of course, beside the church was a school. And my sister was she's about 6 years older than me. So she was going to school and I wasn't. In fact, I didn't go to school after we got off here. Anyway, I did go to school with her one day and see how things work. One room, up to 6th grades, I believe, in that one room. And it was just like a typical day at school, And you got your water bucket was over there. You wouldn't drink water. You go to the label, get your drink of water. And I remember my dad talking about that years ago when he was going to school. Now he said that when you go, the teacher would send you out to get water, and you go get to the pump to get water. I forget where they had to go to get it. And on the way back, it would want to splash out. So what they would do, they'd find 3 or 4 pond birds and put in that bucket of water. And those pond birds would keep that water from splashing. And when they got to the school, they just flipped the pond birds out and carried the water bucket on in. Nobody didn't know that was fine. Yeah, it goes on pine tree. That's what the seed forms in. I don't know where are you from? Pine cones, yeah. But they're a burr when they're green. They turn into a cone. They open up,
Tell me about the Coast Guard on the island. I know in later years you joined the Coast Guard.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, it was there when I first can remember. And I don't remember this, but during the August storm, it was about, I don't know, a bunch of families there. I guess maybe it was 60 or 70 more people there at that time. But I remember all during the years, it was the Coast Guard was there. And then while I was, we weren't living on the island, but after we moved over here, we were down there all the time because that's where the business was, Austin. And I remember going to the Coast Guard station and eating there and staying there. And remember one time that one of the Coast Guard men, Froggy Sterling from Watchaprig, had cattle, and he wanted to round those cattle up. And I had a dog that, for some reason or other, it was a shepherd, and he thought maybe dog would chase the cows. So he even arranged for me and my dog to come down. He even arranged for me to get out of school and bring my dog down to help chase the cows, And of course, that night they left the dog outside, and I was inside. It wasn't long before they had to do something with the dog because he was winding and barking, carrying on, kept them all awake. But anyway, the next day we went up with the dog to get the cows. The dog didn't pay no attention to the cows, but anyway, he kept me down there. But that he was a Coast Guard man. This was maybe in the 40s this took place, but before that, like I said, the Coast Guard was a part of everything that went on. In fact, the Coast Guard would when they would get new supplies in, rope, paint, that kind of stuff, they would give the old stuff to the islanders, paint your boat, tie your boat up, and they supplied a lot of stuff like that. And sometimes if you were give out of gas, they let you have gasoline, and they were just there, it's part of the community. It wasn't a Coast Guard station, it was just part of the community. Different than it is today.
The 33 storm,
Mm-hmm.
a very dramatic part of the life of a Hog Islander.
Yeah.
Tell me what you remember as a boy.
Nothing of that because I wasn't very old at that time. But I'm from listening to my dad talking to others that the 33 was one that was real bad. But then they had another one, I think, in 36, something like that. But some of the people had moved off. Garland Dowdy had moved his home off before this. And but after 33 and then 36, I think everybody realized that what was going to take place, that it was going to, they needed to get away from there. And then a lot of the kids on there, when they went to the 6th grade, there wasn't any more school there. If they wanted to continue their education, they had to come to the mainland to do this. And that's why a lot of families, I think that's the reason why we moved off when we did, because my sister could go to the higher grade. And a lot of families did that. So by late 30s, just about all the families had come off there, and around 40, something like that, they just moved off. The erosion was so bad that I remember Dad said one time he walked off 100 strides, maybe 100 yards from the high water mark, and put a drink bottle in a tree. Had about a week of northeaster, and at the end of that week, that was 100 yards gone off that beach. And it was just like that constantly. And it did that until just about where all the community was gone, with the exception of on the south end, which is still there today, the tower where the old station was and so forth. That's and the creek, so forth. But where the main community was, the biggest part of it, that's long in the ocean. And what you see down there now would be sand is back on the marsh, that not the original island.
A lot of houses were moved from the island.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how they were moved. That's quite a trick to move those islands from those houses from an island to the mainland.
Yeah, well, these guys were very much engineers, They would get these jacks that you've seen what they call a house jack, that you can slide it under. You can jack from the bottom to the top. They would just they would actually jack these houses up, and they put what they call nail a rolling seal under the part where they wanted rollers to go. And they would just jack these houses up and put these seals under, take the foundation out, tear the chimneys out of them. And sometimes it's like this house right here had a kitchen area back. They would do away with that. They just moved the main part of the house. And they would lower those things down on rollers, oak rollers about this wide, this round, and about this long, with oak boards or gum boards. And just put the house right down on those rollers. And they would just move it ahead real slow. And they would keep putting the boards down and keep putting the rollers, and just keep moving it until they would get it down to the marsh or wherever they wanted to. They had the barges, 2 small barges, about 40 foot long, maybe about 12, 14 foot wide. They'd lash those things right side by side, and they get everything right. And when the tide went out, just as soon as the tide left that barge, they'd start moving. And biggest part of the time before the tide got back, they would have that house up on those barges. And some of the places down there, they dug out little slips like to put the barges in. But most of the time, they would just find a creek or something close by the house, just pull it back into that. And
what was the distance that these houses were moved from where their foundations were to the creek, and how were they physically moved? By what?
The distance, well, then it looked like it was a long ways to me, but maybe some of them were a quarter of a mile, maybe a little bit further. I think after they got them over here, they moved them further here to get them in position than they did some of them then. They were moved by, we had what we call a block and tackle. They had what they call a dead man, which was a hatch or something they would carry way out in front. They'd put metal stobs down all in that everywhere that would anchor that thing. And then they would use, mainly, most of the time, the Coast Guard would provide, they had a tractor or they had a truck. and you could use that if they weren't tied up. Then some of the houses were moved by old tractors that were made out of Model A Ford trucks, and some were pulled by old six-wheel trucks and that stuff. But it didn't take much to pull when you had that block and tackle, but you couldn't move very far at the time. Of course, they didn't want to move very far. They had to move slow. They'd roll his houses on the roller. As soon as the rollers came out in the back, well, you grabbed the roller and carried it to the front. And then as soon as the boards got clear, well, a couple of head would grab the boards, or maybe one man would grab the boards, and they'd go up and they'd lay them down in the track that they wanted to go. And the whole time they were rolling, there was guys on each side with axes or sledgehammers. And if you wanted the house to move a certain way, you cut the roller, or you straighten it up, and you just kept doing this. And they'd be moving. You hear them hitting on those rollers, bang, 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 clunk, and all that kind of stuff. And then they would move it up to a certain point, and then they'd set it all up again, and do the same thing over and over.
These guys had no expertise in moving houses.
No.
They just were trying to survive.
Yeah. They just figured out how to do it. Yeah. The island. What it looked like? When I can remember, it was about 7 miles long, actually. You had lots, yards, just like you got here. Maybe not quite the kind of grass you got here. You had pine trees, big pine trees, a big area of woods that would look just like you see over there across that creek, over that down there. And between our house and the ocean was pines and all that kind of stuff. You had sand hills. I think one of the biggest hills was called Jane Hill, was up in the woods area. And you could walk through the woods just like walking through the woods right here on the Eastern Shore, until the ocean began to come in and come in and come in, and then all that was taken away. And along the ocean, after it got into the main timber line or woods line, then you'd have dead trees, and you'd have stumps that would be sticking up all over the beach everywhere. It'd be a job to drive a vehicle through these things at certain points on that. This was down on the south end where the community was. Now up on the north end of the island was more of a I don't know, more like a desert, because the north end of the island wasn't very big at one time, and now it's the biggest part of it. But at one time it was very narrow up on the north end, and over the period of years it just kept building up, and with the sand and sand hills and grass, and then some years ago it caught in those myrtle bushes, and they've grown up over everything now down there everywhere. But what I first can remember, and even back in maybe 20 years ago, you didn't have that. All the trees were gone. Down on the south end, you had nothing but sand and some hills. Now you've got a few bushes, and you've got some trees, some pine trees on there, small ones, and that kind of stuff. And up in the middle of the island, or next to the marsh, you've got some pretty good high hills there, and very much vegetation. But when I can remember, I don't think it was a mile wide. It wasn't that wide, but it was very good. I'd say maybe a good half a mile. But this was in the mid-30s, I would say, early 30s, mid-30s. Well, I guess it eroded a little bit all the time, but then all of a sudden, in the 30s, but mid-30s, especially after the 33 storm, it began to erode real bad, and it eroded real bad up until, I don't know, maybe I guess in the 60s. It kind of stabilized, maybe a little late stabilized, and actually now it's built back out a little bit from what it used to be. But it seemed like it just had a time there when it was just erosion completely. And in 1962, in the spring of 62, or well, I guess it was a March storm, it just flattened the whole area where the community used to be. It flattened that right down just as flat as you see the stone road. And of course, it's back now with the sand hills and all that kind of stuff. It's just everything just keeps changing constantly all the time. Never stays the same. I don't know. Everything changes. Life changes constantly. And these islands with all these inlets come in over 5, 6, 7 miles. You have a lot of tide flow in and out, a lot of tide action, a lot of current action. And it's not the sea really that erodes your beach. It's the current that's running. That's what takes the sand away. It's not the sea just flopping on it. It's that current that runs back. It does it. Why and when? I really don't know. I back in the I don't know how far back, but my daddy and his father lived there, and his father before him I think lived there. And the story goes that the Bowens, which I'm a part of, were in a family in Wales in England, and they run them all out for stealing sheep. Now that's just a story. Anyway, they all landed in New Jersey, and at one time I think the Bowen family owned the area where the Atlantic City is located right now. Yeah, maybe we can catch in on that someday. Anyway, then they migrated on down to Hog Island, and from there they just set up shop on Hog Island, and that's where they stayed until they just washed away, and they had to come over here on the eastern shore, the mainland eastern shore. What did they do? Just like they did, I guess, when I can remember, they fished, they hunted mainly, and clams, and they did some crabbing, and it just made a living right down there. With it, oh, I really don't know, but when I can remember, they're using money. Didn't have to have much of it, but they had to have some, and it was kind of laid back. And like I say, they didn't have any bills. They didn't have any hospitalization, insurance, electric, water bill, and taxes. Well, I don't think they had any taxes. Didn't have any roads to keep, none of that stuff. So it was just a laid back life that you could just, find something to eat, and that was it. That's all they. That was the big thing. And it was very plentiful back there then. In fact, it was so plentiful that a lot of people made their living as guides for hunters, made their living as professional hunters with shorebirds, ducks, geese, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, there was the clams and oysters and scallops, which left in the 30s. And so it was paradise, I guess, at one time. The scallops all died out in the 30s. We had what they call eelgrass, which is in a lot of areas, and that's what the scallops catch and grow in. Well, that died in the 30s, and when the eelgrass died, then the scallops left too. They didn't multiply. Then when the scallops left and the eelgrass left, then the clams came on, and the oysters. See, you had areas where you could plant oysters out in the big bays and stuff where you couldn't do that when you had eelgrass. And then the clams would catch in the flats, and the guys would get up on the flats and walk around and catch them because the eelgrass wasn't there. Years before that, they'd have to go clean down to the point of the eastern shore, fishermen in Smith's Island, to catch clams. The guys that left the island go down there. But after the eelgrass left, they opened up the area for the oysters and clams, which has been pretty good until in the early 90s we lost all of our oysters, and well, they call it dermo, which is the disease that can be in the oyster in the cold months, but in August and July, or July and August, when the water gets real hot, that's when it affects it, kills the oyster. Yeah, I don't think it's from any pollution, because oyster will survive in pollution, unless it's some kind of chemical in there. But with our seaside, we have so much flow in and out of tide that it would take an awful lot of pollution to kill anything like that. People talk about the farm pollution. It's not the farm pollution, because when all the oysters were dead out in the bay, up in these creeks where we had seed area, that's the only place we could get our seed oysters, right in the creeks are here next to the farm land. But it's something else that I don't know what it is, but something that did this. eelgrass. Yeah, I really don't know. It's what caused that to die. Uh, I don't know. It was I don't remember that. See, that was gone before. But I don't think so. See, they have it. It's up in Chincoteague Bay, all up in that area. See, and so, but it hasn't really gotten down here to us, if any amount yet. Yeah. One day it probably will be back again.
Bob, to your recollection, who was the last person and what year did they leave Hog Island?
Uh, I think it was. I don't know. My great grandmother, Dowdy, I believe. I remember when we had moved off, and I don't remember any. We'd go back there all the time. I don't remember any other families living down there at the time, but she was still there and living by herself. And she had a stroke, and then she was moved over here to her daughter's house and lived about 7 years after that. Now it could have been some other families, but I don't remember any family. I do know that the Simpsons were still there though, Al Simpson, because they had this little store down there. Yeah.
What year was that?
Hmm. I don't know. That was in sometime in the 40s, early 40s. Yeah. We left. I think we moved off there in late 38 or 39, something like that. Yeah.
Your father told me a story one time, Captain Bowen, about how Hog Island got started. A tale that was passed down to him from generation. Do you remember hearing that story? Can you tell us about it?
How it got started? I don't know. You mean the island itself, or the people that were there? The people. I really don't know. Other than I think the Bowens I know came from out of New Jersey, and I think the Dowdy family they were from Wales too, I believe, England, and probably they all came from there, and that area. So I really don't know anything other than that. But, and the Phillips family and the Bells and Melvins and
As sitting here today,
Marshalls also.
sitting here today, remembering all these stories, is there one remembrance, one thing in your entire life that you spent on that island that you remember that stands out as being the most important thing that you remember over and over again that happened on the island?
It happened in my life, or just an event that took
Well,
place?
an event that happened during your lifetime.
Oh well, I don't know. I guess I got a lot of memories. I remember that 4th of July picnic, which was down very close to the lighthouse facility there. I remember the old clubhouses that used to be on there. Remember those. I don't remember the old lighthouse at all. Don't remember that. I remember the Coast Guard and the Islanders playing baseball. One particular game that I remember that I was down there with Dad, and all of a sudden Dad was in the game, and I didn't realize. I stand outside his man. I looked up, thought it was my dad. It was Preston Tittemarry, and I remember that. Uh, that stands out, and just being on there, and I remember the woods, and I just remember a lot of stuff.
If Hog Island was still in existence, if Broadwater, the community, the village of,
Yeah.
was still there today,
Uh-huh.
would you move back there and live?
I've never moved off.
You've never moved
It'd
off?
been, acre of ground been worth $1 million to you.
Did you love it?
Oh yeah, yeah. See, after we moved off, we were back there all the time, and then after I got out of the Coast Guard, so of course I was always in the oyster business with Dave. We made back down. I spent my life down there, for years and years working in that area, and just there all the time. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've said enough, I guess.